Welcome to the podcast dedicated to making you a faster cyclist, the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. And today we have Hannah Otto with us to talk about her Kokopelli FKT, all the nerdy details about it. If you haven't seen the video, we'll leave the link down below so you can check it out. You might see like screenshots and stuff of what we're talking about here, and hopefully you go and watch it. It's fantastic, but we'll get into the nerdy details, even though you shared a decent amount of them in the video, but more nerdy stuff than what you cover in the video. I raced Downieville this weekend, and I'm alive to tell the tale. We'll go through that and what happened there. That was my A race for the year. And then we're also going to, if we have some time, we might cover some questions. We've got a lot of them submitted at trainerroad.com/podcast. Hannah, I want to get into it. Can you explain what the Kokopelli, and first of all, what an FKT is, and then explain what the Kokopelli Trail is, so then everyone has context?
Yeah, so FKT stands for fastest known time. And typically it's basically an individual time trial. So in mountain biking, we don't have world records like we would in something like track, where it's like, this is the time for the mile. So instead, we try and set records on specific trails, specific terrain. And this is a way that we can go for these individual records or individual time trials on the mountain bike. So I attempted the fastest known time on the Kokopelli Trail, which is a 137-mile trail. It has 16,000 feet of climbing, and it starts...
Yeah, 137 miles of trail and 16K vert.
Yeah. And
that's more than Leadville by a lot.
Is. Yeah. And it's chunkier than Leadville too, I would say. Oh. It's a very physically demanding trail. It starts in Moab, Utah, and it ends in Loma, Colorado. So the elevation is between 4,000 feet and 8,500 feet. So it also has a little bit of altitude that you're dealing with as well. And it's a very diverse... Well, it depends who you are. It's not elevation like Leadville is per se, but it's still definitely at altitude.
But much harder than Leadville, right? Much harder.
Yes. I mean, and you can see that in the time as well. And it's very diverse terrain. So it starts out with a 3-hour long climb. Out of the gate, you climb 6,000 feet. There's a 15-minute descent in the middle of that, but that should be the race reprieve.
Sorry, but like a commentary during this, that should be the race right there. Just the 3-hour climb.
Can I put this in context for the people that are not over stateside for the numbers really quick?
Yeah,
and the reason I want to do this is because it makes it relevant. 220 kilometers and 4,876 meters of climbing. That's roughly the queen stage of the Tour de France that just happened. It's very close, I think, especially in vert. It's like very close in vert. But now make that on gnarly trails and dirt. Like, with like, it's a very, and no team.
And no peloton.
Yeah. You're just solo. Wow.
Yeah. And so that it's significant that those 3 hours of climbing come at the start, because that's when you're weighed down with the most of your gear. So that's another thing about these FKTs is most of us will do them unsupported. So that means that I will carry in everything I use and I will carry out everything I use. So I won't drop anything on the trail. If I start with something, I have to carry it the whole time. And I won't receive anything out there. I don't have any caches or anything like that. So I have to carry every single thing I will eat throughout it. And the only way I can access water is by filtering it on my own. So when you're starting with, and we'll talk a lot more about the nutrition, but when you're starting with 5,000 calories worth of food and you're immediately climbing 6,000 feet out of the gate, that is significant for how you're going to approach, your pacing and everything else.
Hannah, so you said that most of us would do this unsupported. Like, are there rules to FKTs?
So there's
no one's watching.
Right. So there's there's two different types. You can do a supported FKT or an unsupported FKT, and exactly how you view that is potentially up for debate. So for sure, unsupported means you carry everything on your own, as I just described. One of the debates that people have is if a film crew makes the FKT supported. And that's fine. That's a huge debate. I don't necessarily want to get into that. But for the sake of clarifying exactly what I did, just so that people have the information, when I started, from the moment I started, I did not speak to or interact with my film crew. So nobody said a single word to me. I was fully on my own. And so I received no information. I handled everything on my own. I carried all of my stuff. I did not speak to anybody. And the other thing that I think is, the film crew, obviously the shots that they got, if you've watched this film, are incredible. But it's also important to understand that this was a 12-hour effort, and there is very obviously not 12 hours of footage. It's very, very difficult for them to get footage of this, and most of the time I am fully alone. There's hours upon hours where I don't see them and they can't access me. They had 4x4s out there, and most of the time they either couldn't drive those on the train I was riding because it's too difficult, or they couldn't go as fast as a bicycle can across this type of terrain. So most of the time they were leapfrogging each other, trying to intersect me and then filming me either across a mesa or via a drone. So it's not like I had a vehicle filming me, behind me the whole time. Very far from that.
And with all that said, I do want to talk about that really quick because Lachlan Morton did the Great Divide, and I know like a lot of people, and that's riding from Canada to Mexico, like along the Rocky Mountains the whole way, and a lot of people discredited his record that he set because of the fact that he had a film crew. Much like you, the film crew was not like giving him draft or doing anything like that. I'd be curious to hear what our audience thinks of that, because I feel like some of the core ultra running people feel very strongly. So I'll put a poll down below, but let us know in the comments what you guys think, if it's still a legit FKT. I think it absolutely is. And we're just in the modern era where we can film these things in a non-invasive way. And I think it's cool because now actually we know about it and we're inspired and more people do cool things.
Well,
most of your footage was drone footage, or like you just whizzing by them. Or it's like from like 300 meters away.
Yes. And I think, again, the reason I say like I don't want to argue it is because if people want to discredit it, it's a bummer, but it's honestly fine by me. Like I don't do these things for my name in a record book. I do them to challenge myself, and I do them to be able to share the opportunity with everybody. And
You're slightly crazy.
Yeah. And so, for me, whether or not you want to count the record, I still got the experience, and that's what I'm there for. And so, that's why I can kind of shrug that off, but I'm very thankful I have the footage to be able to share it, because it is a trail that it's very hard and not everyone has the ability to be able to go see it and ride it. And so I'm thankful that I can share it in this way.
Mm. I have a question on power, like with such a long effort and such weird circumstances. And people, if you're listening to this now, and you haven't watched the video, you should go check it out. I'm going to spoil some things. Is that okay, Hannah, if I spoil some things here?
Yeah, go for it.
So if you haven't listened, pause, click the link below, watch, come back. And then you can get the like director's cut and you can hear all the behind the scenes stuff with it. Hannah's, your first attempt at this was miserable. The temperatures are down in the teens. So we're talking single digits Celsius, not single digits. We're talking below zero, like Celsius, like very, very, very cold. And you had to endure those conditions with a crazy wind in addition to that. And that complicated a whole lot of things. But what did your power look like on the second attempt? When you went out there, the weather was better. How did you even pace? It's 13 hours long.
Yeah, it's a really challenging trail to pace because it is mountain biking. So there's two clear sections where pacing is pretty possible. So the first 3-hour climb, and then around mile 80, there's 30 to 40 miles that are pretty flat. So these are the two big chunks that my coach and I sat down and established specific power numbers for. And other than that, we just sort of had a range for the entire effort that we thought I would be around. And then it becomes honestly a lot of RP in between that, because much of this trail is very chunky. A lot of the climbing after those first 3 hours are sort of these ledge type of climbing. So it's like 6 inches to a foot of just lifting your front and rear wheel over and over again. A lot
you
of
just lose all momentum every time you do that.
Yes.
Right?
Very spiky power profile, because if you don't put out that power, you won't make it up this little ledge or this little like steep section or something like that. And then of course, on the flip side of that, you have descents that are like that, which lower your power, but don't necessarily lower your exertion, because you're still using full upper body. You're using, and on an effort like this, I'm constantly thinking about my caloric expenditure, because you will never meet it even. And so you don't want to expend anything that you're not going to get back that's unnecessary. And so I'm trying to be very conservative, very calm, just to keep every calorie in my body that I can. But so it's interesting, because it starts with the first 3 hours of climbing. I made a pretty bold move to start fast, because I felt like the biggest place that I could gain the most time were on the climbs. And in those first 3 hours, that was a place that I could grab a ton of time if I put in a big effort. You still have to be smart about it. So my normalized power for the entire 12 hours, so the second attempt, was 183. And
hold on, 183 so most people listening to this, you think of your power like we think of our highlights, right? Like when we're in a race and we're trying really hard and we look down at that one point when it says 309 watts, we're like, man, I was doing 309 watts during that race. It was hard. In reality, we look back at the average power and we did 180. And the reason I bring this up is a lot of long rides. It's very rare to see a person average over 200 watts for a long ride. They're either a rider with a very big FTP for one reason or another, or they're really well trained. It's very rare to see that, and to see 183 watts on a mountain bike trail with coasting over 12. That is a massive.
And then you can add in the altitude conversion as well. And you
how did that compare to
starting to get
Unbound?
close.
Like, what do you remember what your MP was for Unbound?
Yeah, it was 199 for Unbound.
Oh my gosh. So you did 183. This was longer. And it was way rougher on the body, and it was at elevation.
And all that time that you had to like walk your bike to up the really steep stuff, that's all zeros.
Exactly.
Like, and you're still putting out power.
Yes. Thank you for acknowledging all of this. Yes.
This is a lot. This is like Herculean.
And fill your bottles. Those are all zeros too.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So yeah. And so the first 3 hours, I basically rode tempo for those first 3 hours. So I rode, my power at the top of that 3-hour climb was 212. Which I felt like was something that it didn't feel hard. I knew that wasn't what I was going to hold all day. I was still within myself, but I was sort of trying to get ahead. So at the top of that first 3-hour climb, I was 18 minutes ahead of the previous women's FKT.
Nice. And what was the FKT you were going for? What was the time prior?
The time prior was 13 hours and 7 minutes.
Okay, cool. So what did you?
And her time was 11 hours and 50. Right? Were you saying that?
Yeah.
Yep. 11 hours and 53 minutes is the time that I did.
You didn't.
So how much did you beat it by?
That's an hour and 14 minutes.
Woohoo!
That is seriously impressive.
Yeah.
I've got.
But the first time, I'm sorry, but you did 2 attempts, and the first time you didn't beat it, right?
Correct.
And what happened there?
Yeah, so that should not be blown over. This is the big spoiler alerts. If you haven't seen the video, go watch it. But I did it twice. And I'm a racer. Like that's my number one love is I race bikes. And so my first attempt, I wanted to do it at the end of the race season so that it wouldn't impact my racing. So I slated the attempt for October 29th. Actually, I slated it for October 30th, saw that a storm was coming in and moved it forward one day, hoping to beat the storm. Spoiler alert, I didn't. So, you start in Moab at 4,000 feet, and on that morning at 4,000 feet, the temperature was 35 degrees with a 15-mile-per-hour wind. That felt very doable. And climbing 3 hours out of the gate, it felt like I would have plenty of body heat for that. And then throughout the day, the temperatures would warm up. All would be okay. So I started with arm warmers, leg warmers, and a wind jacket and started up the climb. Well, about halfway up the climb, I hit the snow line, which got thicker and thicker. At some points, I was riding through 2 to 3 inches of snow. The wind picked up to about 25 miles per hour, and the temperatures continued to drop. At the top of the climb, the actual temperature was 17 degrees. With a 25 mile per hour wind, that leaves the feels like temperature in single digits. So I was despite, if you've ever climbed uphill on a bicycle in the cold, you know how much body heat you produce. Like, you know how much body heat you produce. I was shivering, like uncontrollably shivering as I was climbing up this hill.
Knowing that you had roughly somewhere around 10 hours left.
Yes. Yep.
The energy it takes to shiver is insane. It's a whole bunch of, immense.
Yep. And with all of that, I knew I was burning more calories, but it became so difficult to eat because I lost all dexterity in my hands. I had some form of frostnip where just trying to grab my food, my hand at one point actually got stuck shut, where I had to stop and use my other hand to open up my fingers because I couldn't send the signal to my fingers. And all of my fluids froze, completely solid. So I had no fluids until the temperatures raised again, which was I had no fluids for 4.5 hours. The first 4.5 hours.
Why didn't you quit? I would have just quit.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I didn't quit because I was still beating the time. I was still ahead of the record. And I was ahead of the record all the way until 12 miles to go.
No.
It was a punch to the gut. I was dead set with the record with 12 miles to go. And I was completely delirious. I was very hypothermic. And the shivering, the frostnip, the hypothermia, the lack of calories because it was so difficult to eat and move my hands, all of it hit me in the last 12 miles. I was starting to take wrong turn. I took a wrong turn because I didn't really know what was going on. And after all of this, after enduring all of those things, I missed the time by 15 minutes.
Oh, did you feel like you didn't save? I don't know if you've ever done that, Hannah. You're like working on a big project on the computer. You don't save. It's like hours of work. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I have to do it all over again. Like,
it was funny because in the moment I felt like I had no, I couldn't process thought anymore. Like, I remember even in the moment as it ticked over the time, expecting to feel some sort of emotion. And all I felt was sheer panic because I knew I still had 2 miles to go. Like, it was this sheer panic of like, I still have to get out of here. Like, I can't just sit down. Like, I still have to basically evacuate myself is what it felt like at that point. And then when I finished, it was such a severe situation. I mean, I think you hold yourself up for such a long time and you are alone. I didn't speak to anyone that whole time. And then I cross the finish line. I see everyone. I'm able to interact with everyone. And it's like my mind just tells you you're safe now. You can let go. And I have never gone that deep ever in my life. Like I just completely collapsed. And then I couldn't keep any food down after that, because in those type of conditions, your body is shunting blood away from the digestive system to other organs that are essential to keep warm to survive. And at that moment, your body's not concerned about digesting food. So my body had shunted all the blood away from my digestive tract, where after this time of such long physical activity, so much shivering, burning, upwards of potentially 8,000 calories, I couldn't eat anything. My body wouldn't let it stay down.
How long did it take until you could eat normally again?
Define normally. I mean, within 24 hours, I was able to keep down some like very basic food, like bread or something like that. But for my gut to actually feel normal, like normal processes within my body, about a week.
How long, like after that, where you're like, let's do it again?
Well, it's funny because so that's the next emotion is then you go through all of that. I wake up the next morning and that's when it's like, did that really happen? Like, it's so frustrating. If you've ever missed a goal, you know how frustrating it is. And this one hurt really bad. I'd put so much into it. Competitive cyclists had put so much into it. They had all filmed it. And I showed up the next day for the post interview, and we finished the post interview. And I was like, before I left, I was like, guys, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I really thought I could do it. The conditions were bad. Like, I'm sorry. And the film crew's response was, why are you sorry? This is still going to make an awesome film, probably a better film. Like, everyone can relate to failure. And I was like, yeah, but would you hold the footage? Like, if I came back in the next 6 months, would you hold the footage and just put like a little disclaimer at the end of the film? Like, Hannah came back 6 months later and got it. And they were like, if you come back, we'd come back. And so it was set pretty quickly that we would do it again. And I feel like that really helped me overcome a lot of those frustrations, knowing, I think a lot of people can relate to that too, is if you miss a goal, setting a new one right away can really help you push through those difficult emotions.
That says a lot because a lot of, if I did that and I had that experience, I would certainly feel like I'm one and done. I would not want to touch that route again after that. And for you to just be like, cool, I understand the drive and the goal, but that still says a huge amount about your character, that you're willing to just, I want to go back and do it again after having a horrible experience. It's impressive.
Thank you. And I think too, something that I found really unique for this is, so that's very true. And even for the next 2 weeks, I was like, Clayton, what if we went back now? What if I went back now? He was like, Hannah, if I have to hear about this for the next 6 months, like, I will lock up your bicycle.
Just imagine you like rolling over and waking up and being like, what if we went to Kokopelli right now? It's like other people are like, what if we went to Cinnabon right now? The Starbucks in the morning and then Target. And she's like, what if we go to Kokopelli?
Exactly. That was what it felt like. Like was hitting the point. I checked the weather in Moab so many times that my phone, like the first thing you would like unlock it in the morning, it would be like, would you like to check the weather in Moab? Like it was starting to prompt me. I was like, oh my gosh. But what I think is funny is as a professional athlete, I'm very used to the feeling of nervousness. Like nerves are a part of my job and a part of my life. That is very common. But standing on quote unquote the start line the second time, about to start this thing after what I experienced the first time, I did not feel nervousness. I felt fear. And fear is not an emotion that I'm used to. And so that was a really unique experience to feel my body sort of going, wait, we've been here before. We don't want to be here again. Stop, Hannah. What are you doing? As you're, pushing off into what felt like this great unknown for the second time. I don't know. It's very interesting to learn how to push through some of those challenging emotions.
Yeah. How is everything else compared to this? Like,
so
do you still have fire left to do other stuff? Or is like, I don't know what.
This is my greatest feeling about this whole thing is how it has changed my perspective. nothing feels as hard anymore. And that is the sweetest takeaway I feel like I could have from this. And I feel like that is one of the things that makes me a better racer, having had done this, is I think the human experience is to constantly compare experiences, right? Like, oh, okay, I can do this because I've done something similar to this. I can hit this drop because I've done a drop close to this. I can do Leadville because I've done a 6-hour ride, or whatever it might be. And this is one of those things that every time something feels hard, I've done something harder. That's how it feels. Like during Unbound, it was like Unbound was very, very hard. Like I cannot discount that. It was very hard. But every time I felt pain, every time it felt long, it was like, this isn't as hard as that first attempt. And same thing with the second attempt when I was out there. 12-hour long ride, best effort, individual time trial, insanely hard. Every time my body was like, this is too hard, Hannah, you should stop, I would think, not as hard as the first time. Not as hard as the first time. And I feel like that has given me so much. It's like a little superpower, I feel like, that I have now to be able to say nothing feels as hard anymore.
Hannah, that just shows like your mental attitude of working so hard, not hitting your goal, and using that as like, everything in life is better now, right? Everything else is easier. A lot of people that crushes them, right? And it can be super duper hard. I had a big crush at Cape Epic, right? Like I worked really hard and had that, and I did not have the same bounce back that you did. So kudos to you, Hannah. That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you. But I hope that is a takeaway that people can relate to, because everybody has failed. It doesn't matter if it's on the bike or in work, or if it feels like you failed, in a family situation or whatever it is. Everyone has made a mistake and failed, and everyone has the opportunity to overcome that in some way. And that is my biggest takeaway from the film. Like when we started this, we did not plan on doing 2 attempts. This was very far from the plan. But I think what I gained in the end because of it was so much better. And I think the storyline for the film is so much richer and deeper because it is relatable, and it has such a beautiful, this isn't just a story of me going out and doing something cool. Like, I mean, that's cool, but okay, a lot of people do that. This, for me, I want it more than anything to be a storyline of overcoming, of redemption, of never giving up. Like those are the real things that I want people to take away from this.
This is a pro tip from as pro as I can be. Watch this video while you train on the trainer, and you can watch it over and over and over again. And the motivation you will get of like getting through your intervals is amazing. What is the exact name people should search for on YouTube? If they don't, can't link it now. Yeah.
It's the name of the film is Kokopelli Strong. And we came up with that name because after that first attempt, exactly what we're talking about right now is nothing else felt as hard. I felt like I had dug down and found a new strength within myself. And so the term Kokopelli Strong became a standard line in our house. Clayton and I, every time something would feel hard in life or on the bike, we would turn to each other and say, okay, it's time to be Kokopelli Strong. And so that was how we got the name of the film.
Who names, it sounds like it's a Hawaiian trail in the middle of Utah. How did the Kokopelli?
And it's Native American.
Yeah. Okay. It sounds like Hawaii though, right? Like one of the streets on that. And then who came up with this trail? I don't understand who was like drew a line through Moab, like a kid,
like the history,
like colored a map. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Do we know?
Man, Hannah, my understanding, if you know the history, go ahead. I do have some level of basic understanding that might be totally incorrect because I've never like looked it up in anything, but I've just heard it socially in a lot of different discussions. But it's like an ancient route effectively that was put in place by Native Americans and utilized over the years since then. And it's one that is drawn like typically, this is going to seem kind of crazy. Typically people do this like a week, like they like bike pack or they camp or they like off-road and, like it's not doing it all in the time that Hannah does it in 11 hours. So typically this is like a journey that a person will do. This is nothing that's a small feat. So yeah, and it's really cool. There's like a lot of deep roots into this trail for, far beyond just endurance athletes.
That makes it so much cooler.
Yeah.
Like I did not know that. Yeah.
And
that's
I
really
may be
cool.
wrong. If I am, correct me down below. That's what I've always heard because that's just been like a point
Only
of
if it's
discussion.
cooler. If you have a cooler answer.
Yeah. Then it's truer if it's cooler.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it does feel, you feel very connected with the terrain when you're out there because it is very remote. There are large sections out there where you can do a 360 and see nothing and nobody for as far as the eye can see. That's really special and really cool. And it is very much, it spans a lot of, there's big walls, big valleys, you hit like the high alpine at the start when you go up and over 8,000 feet. And then you come down the backside, you have some very rigorous walls that you have to get over. And then it just becomes desert plains and sand and tumbleweeds.
Yeah.
And so you go through a lot of different elements out there. And I think that's a cool thing too about having to stop and filter your own water too, is essentially there is one water stop along the way on the Colorado River at about halfway. And that's where I filtered everything. I hit an emergency situation towards the end where I had run out of water and I was able to stop one other time at like a small river, totally ad lib, saw it with 10 miles to go and was like, I need this. But that's kind of what you're dealing with out there is what the environment and elements and trail will give you.
For those who are listening and haven't seen the video, it looks like a cross between Mars and like a old country Western.
Yeah, totally.
You put those two together. Yeah. It's for us in Reno, it looks just like Reno, but for people who haven't been here, it's very, I think, unique to most people where you live around the world.
It looks iconic. It's like an iconic desert landscape. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like,
yeah. But high desert.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Hannah, I have so many questions. Can I dig in with like maybe the most important one of all?
Let's do it.
Can start out. True or false? Your white socks and shoes were what got you the record on the second attempt.
They looked
really
crisp, right?
They were crisp. They looked really good. Yeah. And your first attempt, you did not have those on. So, it's, disregard the weather, but they looked very good. Moving on to a more important question. How many kilojoules did you burn overall?
Yeah. We got so nerdy with the nutrition on this. I worked with a dietitian and we had so much fun working through this because you do have to carry it all. So it's this fine balance of doing what is optimal and then also balancing what is possible, which we'll get into with the fluids. But KJs, I burned this all in the second attempt. KJs, I burned 6,649 KJs. Which then most people don't think about the fact that in an effort like this, you also have to include your RMR or just like your normal calories. So if you're doing a 1 hour ride, you probably don't need to factor it in because it's not that much. But a 12-hour ride, that's like half your daily calories. So 6,600 kJs. Let's just estimate another 1,000 on top of that for living. So now we're at 7,600 plus upper body calories because KJs are just that pedaling. And upper body is definitely a big factor in this. And then on that first attempt, you also have to factor in the shivering calories. So you're talking at the end, upward of 8,000 calories for sure. In this.
So that's more than 4 times the typical amount that a person would ingest in a day, or should ingest, I should say, according to guidelines and recommendations.
Yeah, typical versus should.
Yeah, difference.
That's like,
that's a lot.
I don't understand. Wait,
So
I think it's way more than 8,000 with the amount of like for mountain biking in your upper body and all the hiking and stuff. Like, that's conservative.
I wonder that it's so. I mean, we can't quantify.
It's hard to estimate.
The pedals. But boy, and it's not just upper body. It's like every muscle in your body has to do a lot more work to stabilize even when you're sitting down and pedaling. It's not just when you're standing up, and it's every little bit of change in the surface, or if it becomes softer like snow or sand, it requires way more contraction and balance with your whole body. It's a big drain. So yeah, I mean, I feel like 8,000 would be the absolute bottom of what it would be. I'm sure it's higher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hannah, you're the best, because like the joy you had when you're like, I worked with a dietitian and we nerded out, and you're like, the calories I was eating and how many was burning and stuff. And I think a lot of people would roll their eyes like, I don't want to do that with my life. And then I went for 13 hours and it was the worst thing I did in my life, the hardest thing, but it was the best thing at the same time. And I couldn't even open my hands. And like, yeah, like you're wired differently. This is amazing. It's yes. We all need a little Hannah, like inside of our spirit. Yeah.
That's right. Hannah, what about carbs, electrolytes, and then milliliters of fluid per hour? I would assume that it varied just because you had to ration in the different temps, but I don't know if you have averages.
So, this is so cool. So one of the changes I made from attempt 1 to attempt 2 was I worked even harder to train my gut across those 6 months. So in attempt 1, my goal was 85 grams of carbs per hour. In attempt 2, I did 100 grams of carbs per hour.
Wow.
Which I'm so pumped on for a 12-hour effort. And that comes out to 4,800 calories. Which like, gosh, this is just, you really have to pause and think about this, because 4,800 calories is so many calories. Like we commented, that's double what most people would eat in a day plus. That's basically entirely through ride food. And I'm still in more than 3,000 calorie deficit when I finish.
So even
though even though I am pushing the absolute limit, theoretically, of carbs, like 100 grams is so much, I am still in an extreme deficit when I finish. And that is so important for people to hear, because it's not just about the hourly calories, it's about how all of that piles on top of each other. So if you do 50 grams of carbs per hour, you're in a 6,000 calorie deficit when you finish. That's not, that you have such a performance decline due to that, and your recovery is going to be gnarly, because to put those 6,000 calories back in your body is going to take days, potentially. So
and not only that, it's not like your body just shuts off the taps after you train, after you finish. And it's like, cool, we're done, back to basal metabolic rate. Instead, your body's like, the throttle's stuck. Like it just stays open for a long time until it peters out. But like, so you're burning a lot more calories even afterwards, because your body, the afterburn effect and everything else you have going on.
So that was a huge change in my thinking across this process, is thinking about how those calories are loading on top of each other to create that overall deficit for the ride, instead of just focusing on what each hour looks like.
Can you imagine approaching an average person and just being like, hey, I need you to ride 137 miles. Climb half the elevation of Everest when you do that on rough terrain. And then you also have to eat 8.5 Big Macs throughout the whole ride.
I don't want to like be out in the cold weather for an hour, like just walking.
The scale of what you did here is just nuts, Hannah. It's just crazy.
You.
My house gets a little cold and I'm like, I put a sweatshirt on. I don't like that uncomfortableness at like 68.
What about fluids? And this is a question we already, like, as soon as you did this, and the video went live, we got 4 questions submitted to TrainerRoad.com/podcast of people asking, what water filter did she use? Because this is going to be complicated with the fluid that you use in terms of how you time it out, but also just logistically, I've used a Sawyer straw before, and it's a bit cumbersome, and it has like multiple pieces that you put together. Yours looked really streamlined and easy to use.
Really streamlined.
I use the Kaden Be Free soft flask water filter. So it's just a soft flask, and then the filter is in the lid, and you screw on the lid, and then you just squeeze the bottle and it goes through that lid and filters. So very streamlined, very fast. I was able to filter my 2.5 liters of water in less than 5 minutes. So pretty quick. Yeah, it's a pretty smooth process. Fluids were potentially the hardest thing to figure out for this, because you're limited to either what you're willing to carry and then your refill options. So my refill option was, like I said, at the halfway point, which meant I needed to carry fluids for about 6 hours on both sides. And then also the climbing that you have at the start, you're essentially carrying all of the fluids at the start. So like if you wanted to carry 5 liters of water at the start, you're carrying that up a 6,000 foot climb. It's just, it's a very difficult balancing equation. So what I came down to was I had a 2 liters in my Usui hydration pack, and then I had 1 bottle, which is about a half liter. So I had 2.5 liters, and then the plan was you have to drink it all by the refill station, because if you don't, you can only refill what you've drank. So the first time, it was gnarly because I wasn't able to, because it all froze. So the first time through, I had barely drank anything by the time I got there, which meant I barely filtered, which meant the first time I did it, the 13-hour effort, I drank just over 2.5 liters of fluids for 13 hours.
Oh my gosh.
So that's why that was so severe.
I will do a liter an hour sometimes.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, granted, that first time was cold. The hottest it ever got in that first attempt was 40 degrees. So it was quite a cold one, but still, you need way more than that. The second time, I stuck with the same plan, but I was actually able to drink it all, refilter it. So in that case, I had 5 liters total, plus 1 emergency stop at the end where I stopped at the little river, filled up my filter, and squeezed the filter directly into my mouth. So we can call that another half-ish liter. So the second attempt I did with 5.5 liters of fluid, which is still very minimal across a 12-hour day. And what adds complications to that is the electrolyte situation. Most of us consume our electrolytes and a lot of our carbs through fluids. When you don't have that many fluids available, it becomes very difficult to now shove all of your carbs and electrolytes into that minimal amount of fluids as well.
Yeah, that's less than like the 500 milliliter cycling bottles that you see in the Tour de France, like the normal sized. That's less than one of those an hour is what you had to average, just because. And it's not like, if you carried more, it's just the constraints. It is what it is. That's why you can't hit it perfectly.
It's a balancing act, and I think it's I don't know that there is one perfect answer, but someone else might do it a different way and have a different result. But that's part of what I find so fun about these challenges, is that there are multiple ways to skin the cat. It was very interesting to try to plan that element. Like I said to the dietitian, I was like, am I insane to try and do 12 hours on 5 liters of water? And she was like, do we have a different option? I was like, not really. I'm not willing to carry more. She goes, then why are we talking about it?
Hannah, you're the type of person that like breaks boundaries though. Like everyone else goes, are you kidding me? Right? Like this is like, I just can't say how impressed I am about this. This is so cool.
So, and then the second attempt, the coldest it ever was 40 degrees. And then the high was around 80 degrees. So a pretty different situation there. Electrolytes total, because I had to calculate this out because of the water restraints, were pretty minimal as well. In the end, I had 3,100 milligrams of sodium across the whole time as well.
How did you take that in? Was that through any capsules, or was that purely through drinkable, like in your mix?
Purely through mix, and then the first endurance gels do have 75 milligrams per liquid shot, and I took 18 of those liquid shots.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's like almost
just carrying
a full
18
box. Yeah. It's a lot. So that does add up as well. Yeah, I was nervous to do any sort of like tablet or anything like that because I had such minimal water. And anytime you use sodium, you need water as well. And so I had to be really cautious about how I balanced those things. And that's why minimum water also equaled minimal sodium. I also did use caffeine. So in the morning, I drank, I had essentially 300 milligrams of caffeine before the start. And then
That's a lot.
it's a lot. Yeah.
But you also
Hannah.
you take in a lot of caffeine, right? Like
I do.
think you've mentioned on the podcast before.
But 300 milligrams would still be considered probably like a performance dose. But it's not outside of the range that would be considered, acceptable or good for the body.
Yeah. Not excessive.
Yeah, exactly. And then every 2 hours, I topped off with 25 milligrams, which helped, according to like the half-life and all of that, keep it elevated.
You calculated that?
My dietitian did.
That's cool.
Yes. And then one other thing I did that you guys might debate, and I think that's always interesting to have, is for this effort, I did decide to take in a small amount of protein twice. And the reason that I did that isn't because it's agreed. Protein does slow down the use of your carbs. Totally in agreement. For this effort, I made the decision with the dietitian to do it because it's so long that we wanted to do that for my comfort level, because protein helps to satiate. And if you feel satiated and your brain feels that like satiation, you might be able to push harder because of that emotional benefit that you get. And so even if you're consuming as many carbs as you want, you still might experience hunger across this long of an effort. And so we didn't want to go overboard, but we wanted to try and cut some of that hunger pains a little bit. And so every 4 hours, I took in 10 grams of protein.
How did you take in the protein? Was it through like some gels have them added in to it, or?
So most people I think would do a bar, but I'm allergic to nuts, which makes that quite challenging. And then I wanted to do some sort of drink mix because that also feels like an easy way, but I was so limited on water. I wasn't willing to sacrifice any towards that. So in the end, I ended up actually using meat sticks.
I was just going to joke around and say beef jerky.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah.
It makes sense though, too, for like palate fatigue of all the sugar. Even just for that. And I don't know if we have like, how many studies go like, have people train for 12 hours in a row.
Yeah.
Right. And then protein versus not.
We just covered protein.
I think it's not bad at all.
We just covered protein not long ago with Dr. Poligar, and like there isn't science backing it up as being performance enhancing in terms of like you can produce more power or something like that over longer rides, but they weren't 12 hours. But the main thing that, like you said, Hannah, and we talked about this, I can't remember on which one, but anyways, the mind of the athlete is extremely important as well. And the body signals to the mind many times, as well as the mind signals to the body, but there's that relationship there. And if you feel more full and satiated, that's extremely important and can help you continue to perform, like this event is for you, or I shouldn't say event. This effort was very much like a mixing of compromises where you had to even though it might not be ideal, you have to engineer the best path for you. And it's going to look a little bit different. Can we get into equipment? So what tires did you run? What pressure? And did you run inserts? Because you were on rock, but also sand.
Yeah. So I ran the Kenda Rush SCT 2.4, and I did run an insert in the rear. I think tires across that long of an effort, you do want them to be fast rolling because time adds up. But the slowest thing you can do is have a flat. And if you have a flat at the start and you're nursing a flat for 7+ hours, forget about it. So I think being very conservative with your tire setup was super important for this. Tire pressure was fascinating. The first attempt, I was so delirious at the end, we didn't get to measure it. But the second attempt, we measured it at the start and the finish, because we planned my pressure knowing that it would go up throughout the day. It would go up initially when I went up in elevation, and then from 40 to 80 degrees, it would go up as well. So I started with 17 PSI in the front and 18 PSI in the rear. And at the finish, both of those were up 4 PSI, which was super interesting. Yeah. I didn't anticipate quite that much.
Do you typically run around 17 to 18?
I would typically run around 17 to 18. And just to be conservative, we started at that knowing it would go up a little bit. So I wanted a slightly higher PSI for conservative reasons. We didn't quite realize it was going to go up a whole 4 PSI. So I found that super fascinating.
I've heard this thing, and I don't think that it's scientific, but in this case, it does check out. So it's interesting to bring up. I've heard this thing that says for every 10 degrees Fahrenheit, it's 1 PSI increase that you experience. I have never seen this scientifically graphed. As much as I can tell, this is just like some bro science that people have brought up. But for what it's worth, I have seen it also correlate loosely for me, and it seems like for you too in this case. 21 to 24 is pretty hard, but toward the end it's a bit more sandy, is it not, than in the beginning?
So it's a bit more sandy until the last 12 miles, and those last 12 miles are all single track, and it is gnarly single track. Oh. And by gnarly single track, I mean I don't think if I was fresh, I could ride it without getting off. Like, it is really challenging single track with big old like rocks that you would have to jump over, and like big ledges that you're dropping down. So that is definitely a place where that 4 PSI hurts at the end. But it is so interesting. Again, like you're saying, it's a challenge of compromises, because the alternative could be to start at a little lower pressure, which you may be risking something a little bit at the start then. But not only that, is I'm starting on a 3-hour climb. I don't want to be riding on a super squishy tire up this climb. Like, I want to be smashing it up this climb. You would want a little more pressure, actually. So it's like you said, it's a game of compromises and of just thinking like, what is the best of all options that I can do?
Yeah. What changes did you make to your bike?
Yeah. So I ran a 32 chainring, which I think you could do this on a 34, but I wanted an easier bailout gear. So I think that's good for people to hear this long of an effort. You want to be more conservative with your gearing. I did run.
Excuse me. 32 is not very conservative. I mean, Hannah is one of the top in the world. Like, yeah, you're like 32. Like, what? That's not conservative at all. That's my regular everyday chain ring.
But there'd be a temptation for a big long event like this with higher speeds and spots that you would want to run a 36 or something, because then you'd want to not spin out. But in reality, the time you would lose from coasting in those, I mean, because you're probably going to be coasting around those speeds anyway, the time that you would lose is marginal. And instead, it's about making sure that you don't have to work too hard on the steep climbs. Is that how you decided it? Or were you optimizing like for chain line or something? I don't know how you decided.
I mean, you do think about all those things, but across this long of an effort, I think at the end of the day, like, it's so funny because we're getting nitty gritty here, but I really think that a lot of these answers are actually big picture answers at the end of the day. And so that is exactly what I thought as well. Okay, I could run a 34 for these higher speed sections, but 110 miles in, when I'm in this flat section, am I really going to need to be in the 34-10? Like, no, if anything, if you're going that fast, you might take a minute to coast and eat a little extra. A little more conservative with that. I had to run a light at the start. I started at 5 a.m. both times, so that's unusual for me. So I ran a Lezyne light at the start. I did have an insert in the rear, which is something I don't typically do. That was definitely a conservative move for me. I ran top tube bags, which is something I've never done before because I don't do efforts this long typically. In one of my top tube bags, it was completely just nutrition, as much as I could get in there for easy access. And then in the other one, I had sort of emergency things like a small charger. I had an SOS device, things like that, CO2, things like that. And then I also I had a bigger hydration pack. Usually my pack is smaller. I made a bigger pack so that I could bring an extra jacket. And then probably the most unique thing I did was I did wrap ESI RCT bar wrap, or like bar tape, around the bars to be able to put my forearms on the bars and not slip, so that I could ride in that aero position to get aero for those 30 to 40 miles.
Did you make any other aero changes to your setup? or equipment?
That was probably the only major aero change I made. In the first attempt, I did ride the Giro Eclipse, which is their more aero helmet. But it was too hot in the second attempt to do that. But aero was definitely on my mind. It's just like when you start to go down the list of like efficiency, comfort, power production, aero starts getting pushed further and further down for an effort of this length unsupported. So,
and with the average
not
speed
as
that
many.
you were carrying too, right?
Yeah,
Like it's not like it's a, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because the 30 to 40 mile section that is flat, you do go quite fast. But in the end, I think my average speed was in the 11s, between 11 and 12 miles per hour. So it's not like I'm carrying crazy speed for the whole attempt. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of under that like 13 mile an hour threshold that it seems like aerodynamicists point out is like a spot where afterward the gains really start to add up, and below that they don't seem to have as much of an impact.
Mhm.
Okay, just a handful of more questions here. So you picked the Pivot Mach 4 SL, I think, which is that's the full suspension cross country bike from Pivot. Why did you pick that versus a hardtail? Because a lot of people for these big long routes, you'll hear them pick like they want to pick the lightest bike, the most quote efficient bike. Although that's arguable. So why'd you pick the full suspension?
Well, I think it's definitely a full suspension course. Like we talked about, there's a lot of sections that are very chunky and very rough. So I think that the full suspension is, you need that extra cushion to be as fast as you can be. Like you said, a lot of people think light equals fast. My full suspension is only about 2 pounds heavier than my hardtail. And I definitely gain way more than that back in the compliance aspect across that terrain. It also saves a ton of energy, I think, across. It's funny because you said people might run a hardtail for the longer efforts. I think the longer the effort, almost the more reason to run a full suspension, because you're getting beat up across that time. Like I think if I had run a hardtail across that terrain towards the end, your hands and your forearms, like in your back, you would just feel so much more clapped at the end. So it definitely helped me save energy. And it can help limit the chances of mechanicals, specifically flats. If you have that little extra cushion, you're less likely potentially to get that rear flat.
Yeah, it's super smart. Hannah, this is just like such an incredible effort. I love that, like what you talked about, how it puts everything else in perspective now. And now it almost makes sense to see like you going to Unbound for your first time and performing so well there, and you having so far this year like such amazing results, because like mentally speaking, like you're just like you're hardened from this, right? Like you and you're filled with confidence because of it. It's just really cool. Again, if anybody hasn't seen the video yet, the link will be down below. You can search Hannah Otto Kokopelli Strong. You can find it on there, on YouTube as well. It's just super impressive.
I want to say too, Competitive Cyclists sponsored this, right?
Yes.
So they don't give us any money, but shout out to them. Like, it'd be great if they could sponsor more of these. I think everyone now gets this piece of content that they can watch on the trainer and watch over and over and over again. And you just get so motivated to not fail. So go buy your next bike part there. I think I've never said that about any company, but I'm so happy that they did this. So competitivecyclist.com.
Yeah, we know how much work that takes, right, Nate? To like produce.
We did our own video before. Yeah.
It takes a lot of work, a lot of money, and a big dedication by them. And I think that if we can all show our support by supporting competitive cyclists like that, I think that does work out. And yeah, they don't pay us. We aren't paid by anybody. Well, we're going to go from that one thing that was very impressive to one thing that is not very impressive. My A race for the year. But before we do that really quick, Nate, I don't think that you listened to this, but in episode 480, Alex Wild and I were talking about all the different things that we do for our bikes. And I mentioned the fact that I use Muck-Off Ceramics C3 dry lube instead of chain waxing. Because I asked Alex, what do you do now that ice friction doesn't exist? I have never received so many messages in my life of people just disgusted, upset, like angry that I would use like, and first of all, it seems like there's something with like people really dislike Muck-Off. It went so bad that somebody got my phone number somehow and sent me a text message. I'm going to show this to you guys. I'm going to read this to you guys. It's insane. Okay, here we are. Jonathan, I'm reaching out because I simply cannot believe what I heard you say during podcast 480 about using muck off. For somebody that claims to care about the details as much as you do, you've just completely discredited all of your opinions. Yikes. Then says you're losing out on huge gains in this area. Meanwhile, you're counting actual grams of fructose. You've lost the plot. Stick to your hot takes about warmers and socks.
Whoa. I have so many questions. First of all,
text message.
You cannot mess with the chain waxing community. This is a community one should not mess with. Question 2, did you respond to that text message?
No, I did not respond. Yeah. No, there was no response, Mary. First of all, how in the world did you get my number? Second of all, no way I'm responding to that. So
no.
But yeah, there's a cult. It exists, and it's centered on chain waxing, and they're very aggressive, and they mansplain like crazy. This is like probably I experienced 1% of what it's like to be a public-facing woman in the world, and to share anything about what you do, because, man, it was very Anyways, so everybody, I got back into chain waxing. I'm sorry. Silka has like a setup that they have their wax reportedly tests the fastest. They've got a mini crock pot, like the one that you use for like estheticians would use, like you've got a mini crock pot. It's digital. It's dialed in. They have specific temperature settings. They've got a little hanger that really works so that your chain drips back into the pot, all these things. So I did it. And yeah, I don't know. We'll see. It sure took a lot of my time this week. And that was the main thing why I quit waxing chains, was because I was spending so much of my time waxing chains, getting like a inconsistent to even like a marginal benefit versus like a really nice chain lube. And I wash my bike after every ride, because that way I'm very detail oriented and anal retentive about this stuff. And I get really scared about the fact that if I'm not looking at my bike and seeing what's going on, I'm going to miss a crack or miss a loose bolt. And then that would cause further problems down the road. So
loose bolt, huh?
Yeah, Nate. Wink, wink. So because of that, I wash my bike all the time. And as a result, adding on the chain lube is like, it's an additional 10 seconds probably because I'm already cleaning the drivetrain anyway. So, I'm losing in time, but we'll see. This week I raced Downieville is my A race. And I pre-rode this course. And when I pre-rode it, I was kind of bummed. It wasn't that fun. It had some fun, gnarly sections, which I liked, but there were a lot of like weird, like fire roady Jeep trail sections I didn't really love. But the big thing is you had to go through a bunch of water, and my drivetrain sounded terrible. And as I mentioned on the podcast, it seems like with this new SRAM transmission drivetrain, it just does not hold lube very well. It seems to lose it faster. And then if it's running dry, it misshifts. Whereas otherwise, it doesn't really seem to misshift on the other drivetrains. This one does seem to misshift if it gets dry. And I can report that the wax did work better than the lube in this case. So hopefully.
Do you think it just worked better because of what you're describing, like the water and stuff? Because one of the things I've heard about the wax is, I'm so scared now to say anything about waxing. But one thing I've heard about the wax is that it maybe doesn't make as big of a difference for shorter events. And really where you see the biggest difference is, for example, at Leadville, in the last 2 hours, you would see the biggest difference because it maintains that lubed sort of effect.
Yeah, I think you're probably spot on, Hannah. That would be my assumption. The tricky part with Downieville is you literally ride through, like there's a section I rode through that was up to my knees, and you're like pedaling through it with water. And then there's probably about 45 other creeks, honestly, that you like cross throughout the trail. So it's super dusty. And so your drivetrain, even with the wax chain, like my bike sounded really bad at the end of it. Like,
water on wax chains like strips it.
It does.
It's tough. Yeah.
Yeah, and then when you combine grit with water, then it's like it's a combo to remove wax, almost.
Just switch chains.
So it's true. Myron was there, right? I could have, handed Myron, he could have given me a chain partway down or something.
Probably in 12 seconds.
Yeah.
That guy's so good.
He's so good, right? Yeah, it would have worked well. Can we go into Downieville really quick? It's my A race, and I've been prepping for it, and I wanted to go over my learnings from this whole thing. So I had this goal going in of trying to get 15th overall. That's out of like all the racers. And I thought that if my fitness was like, quote, perfect and everything went great, I think that I could do that. Just looking at the numbers, I figured that I would have to hold somewhere around like 300-ish watts up the climb. And the climb is very long. To explain the course, it's 27 miles, but you start out at around, I think, 4,000 feet and you climb up to around 3,500 feet, I think. And you climb up to 8,000 feet. And you do that over the course of like 6 miles, I think. It's very steep, big up. And then after that, the down is really long and pedally, but also extremely technical, extremely rough. It's just like an absolutely abusive trail. And there's some sections that are fast and smooth, but a lot of it is extremely rocky. So, and it's probably the truest single race test of a mountain biker that I've ever ridden in my life. So it's like,
Wow.
You've got the steep climbing. It's also, you have to kind of pick lines sometimes too, because it's a little loose and really steep. But then you've also got really technical, sharp rock single track where you kind of have to be careful about where you place your tires, and climbing single track like that, descending single track, really fast, wide open. I think my max speed was 44 on the day. So like that's really fast for a mountain bike in a race. Like that's very fast. There's really chunky, rocky sections where you're just going through rock gardens forever. Anyways, it tests the whole spectrum. So it's like a really good test of a real mountain biker. And interestingly, you see wild swings where like people are really far up at the top of the climb, and then those people just get completely blown away on the descent, or vice versa. It's a really cool race. And it's an interesting situation where if you pre-ride it, it's probably not that fun if you just cruise, but then when you race it, it somehow is more fun. I ended up 34th overall. I was the 33rd male and second in my age group. Sophia beat me. I was hoping that I could get close to Sophia's time or beat her, but no way, that's not going to happen. She beat me by, I think, 4 minutes. So she was crushing it. Looking at the numbers, I crossed the finish line as the 84th person to cross the start line, I should say. And then probably 20 people passed me after that because everyone went crazy on the climb at the beginning. I held in around 315-ish watts. We were lower in elevation, and I figured I couldn't just start out at whatever I wanted my average power to be, because I did need to hold some sort of position. So I let myself drift up into threshold and just tipping over threshold for that elevation, and then dropping down slowly as time went on. But I estimate that I passed over 100 riders. The number that I estimate is 108. So that gives you like an idea. 108 riders over 27 miles. That's a lot of people. And
why were you starting so far back?
So they do pros first. They're pro men and women, and they do single speeders first, which that's very old school for a cross country race. They should put single speeders at the back. But I will say some of these single speeders, I passed one of them with probably like 6 miles to go. How insane is that? Like they started 7 minutes ahead of us, but still, that is insane. They are crazy fit and strong. But yeah, that's why. So we were started like minutes behind. And then by the time I was probably like in the third row of, I think, over 100 people in our age group of the 31 to 40-year-old age group. And then there were kids in front of us and lots of different stuff. So
because on trails like this, passing is such a, it's such, if you're talking about time, it's such a huge disadvantage, because not only is it the time that it takes to pass, you're probably also taking less optimal lines. And then also, like when you pass someone, you have to slow down as you come up to them, communicate that you're going to pass, and then speed back up. So it's really hurting your momentum as well. So every one of those passes is so much more than whatever the 5 to 10 seconds you're physically passing. It's like the speed up and the slow down and the alternate line as well. It's a huge disadvantage.
Yeah, and if Sophia's listening, all that passing probably cost me 4 minutes, Sophia. So, but
definitely.
But yeah, let's go into what went well and what didn't go well. I'll cover what didn't go well first, and that was one of the things, Hannah, is I had to take a ton of, quote, bad lines on the climb and then all throughout the descent. And this is like kind of it's like a Jeep trail going up, but there's definitely one good line. And then the other lines, it's kind of like deeper rock or it's kind of sandy almost. And it was interesting. Like I was riding behind a guy, and then I pulled over, forgive me. I pulled over into the soft stuff to go past him. And behind him, I was only able to do like 260 watts. And then to like hold his pace and barely go by him, I was doing 350 because it was so sandy and rocky-ish, right? And So when you start to add that in, it's like doing over-unders into your like stable effort that you're doing all the way through. And then on the descent, I took a lot of like blind lines because I did not know the trails well. I couldn't get up there to pre-ride as much as I wanted, only once. And I took a lot of like blind lines that were probably a lot slower in the end. So that was kind of something that didn't go well. But above all, the watt kg that I like achieved, it definitely wasn't what I had hoped. And that's just life. Like, and I think everybody listening to this, I think it's okay to set a high goal of what you want to achieve, you know? And then what you do is you just focus on nailing your workouts and you let that be what it is. And for me, life has been just pretty complicated over the last 6 months in particular for me and our family and stuff. So yeah, I haven't been as fast. When I train, I don't seem to absorb as much and I haven't been able to be as perfect with it as I wanted. All that said, I'm really like personally proud of myself for trying to get in the workouts when I can and fitting in what I can. And, you know, I still averaged about 4.2 watts per kilogram up the climb for an hour and 5 minutes. So that's good. And I'm satisfied with that. It's, you know, it's not the old days of when we were pushing 5, but it's still okay.
Don't you feel confident though that it also would have been higher if you hadn't been making all those passes? Like you just described a situation in which your power was impacted due to a pass.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think it would have been greatly higher though, you know? But it would have been better. Yeah, my times would have been better and I would have been able to put out more power over the second half of the climb, I think for sure. But that's just kind of.
I think the takeaway is that in cyclocross and cross country, especially, start positioning really matters. Or the really big races like Leadville, where, you know, there's thousands of people, 2,000 people.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's 1,000.
And I think that if I was fitter, you know, and everything else, I probably could have justified a harder start to get around more people earlier on and not fall back and then not have to repass a lot of those people, you know. But that's, again, with the fitness I had, I feel like I executed pretty well there. I think I would have probably wanted to, oh yeah, go ahead, Hannah, sorry.
Oh, I'm curious. I think that this is a really relatable thing for people. I hear a lot people, especially in off-road events, come into events with very specific goals, exactly as you've outlined now. Like you had a placement goal and you had a watts per kg goal. I don't know if you had a time goal, but those are usually the 3 things that people have. And then elements play into XC racing so heavily that I feel like it's very difficult then on the back end to sometimes be able to decide whether or not the race was a success, or if you fell short. And so I'm just curious for people who might be experiencing that sort of conflicting emotions after a race where they didn't on paper meet their goals, but it was still such a good effort. And they know like, well, I did pass 100 people and I had these elements and this and that. How do you look back and know that it was a successful race despite maybe not on paper hitting exactly what you wanted?
Yeah, I think the 2 main things are like, number 1, I had an execution plan, which was to pace the climb to the point where I felt like it was a steady effort from the top to the bottom and it was a capacitive effort. And whatever the power was going to be, the power was going to be. And the second one was on the descent to not put myself in danger and also to have fun. And I know that sounds super soft and fluffy, but for me, the months leading up to this, like you said, Hannah, I had these goals that I was like, these would be great watermarks to hit, or benchmarks to hit, forgive me. But at the same time, the only thing I can do is just focus on executing my workouts. And it was just like, do my workouts, fuel the work. And that was what I did there. So a week before I got out of the race, or I did the race, I had a workout, like a taper workout that Adaptive Training gave me. And it was like 10-minute efforts at threshold. And it was just a few of them. And when I did that, I was like, this is perfect because I'm going to get a really good test to see if where I'm feeling. Because sometimes you train, you've got fatigue on there, and then you get a recovery week, and then you get into your taper, and suddenly it's like, wow, you have this shiny new fitness that has just been uncovered because you got to rest. And when I did that, I got a really clear indication that I was like, okay, so my numbers are not going to be what I was hoping they would be, but that's okay. I just adjust. The same thing exists. I just want to be steady paced up that climb. And then I want to make sure that I go through that descent and have fun and be safe, which, yeah, so that's why it was a success for me. You know, for me personally, I have to have those little carrots to reach for. Thinking of top 15 overall is what motivates me to go a little bit harder. Thinking of reaching for that watt kg, that helps me. But I've also reached a point where I'm not discouraged and to the point of like, you know, feeling like, you know, and not wanting to do the race or something like that, I'm not discouraged when I can't hit them. I just reassess and change the setup, So I think that's how I managed
so when
it.
your goal is top 15, you do that workout, you become aware that, oh man, I'm not quite where I want to be. How do you then stay motivated for the event in particular? Because I know a lot of people that would happen and they'd be like, oh, I'm not going to achieve my goal. Do you still continue to have that goal and try and make adjustments that are non-fitness related? Like, oh, well, I still have my technical skills. I still have this, that. Or do you move the goalposts? Like, okay, top 15, it was a great goal that got me here, but now my goal is top 30. Like, do you adjust? How do you adjust in that way?
Yeah, I don't move any goalposts. I just focus on what I can control. Like those end like aspirational goals were always the things to make me stretch through the process, but they weren't anything that would replace the process. So in this case, I just refocused on the process, and the process was execution in the race. It was just the pacing and then making sure I was setting myself up for like that good, fun descent. So yeah, it's maybe a bit unorthodox, but what I've learned about myself is that I can set goals, and if they aren't something that is like ambitious, then they don't push me and pull me along. And to get more out of myself, I have to set like a higher goal. And then I just focus on the process. And then I check in every once in a while with it, but I just focus on the process and making the process better. So that's kind of how it was. So I wasn't bummed at all. And I didn't even know how I placed. We were all packed up and like ready to go after the race. And then my dad was kind enough to come up, and then he was like, you should go check the results to see like where you're at just in case. And I was like, wow, I got second in my age group. I'm super excited. So, which was cool. So, but the result wasn't it. Well, other thing I would have changed, probably I would have used a hydration pack maybe instead of bottles. I just used 2 bottles. The race was 2 hours and 20 minutes long, and I ran a bit dry. And I think that if I was carrying a hydration pack, I could have carried a bit more fluid. The only balance though is that if it was hotter, like then that hydration pack would have kind of trapped a lot of heat on me. And I think that it would have been worse. The only other thing that didn't go well is I messed up a tech section. I just mistimed a shift. It's really technical, like going up this like rocky, really steep wall. And I mistimed it. I jumped off my bike. Like instantly I was like, I could probably jam a shift or two, but I might break a chain. That would suck. So instantly in my brain, I was just like, just get off and run. So like right before my momentum stopped, I swung a leg over and jumped off and went to run. My foot landed on like a really slick rock. And because I'm old, I guess now, I pulled a hammy, but we kept going. So,
oh no.
Yeah, but it didn't, it's a little sore and tender, but some things that did go real well. The pacing was really good. I used power to pace. I knew that my power would drop off slightly as I went up in elevation, and I knew to expect that. But I just rode when I could to power, and I was shooting for right around like 285 watts, which I figured was going to be around possible. And I think I ended up coming in at the top of the climb just under that. So that worked out pretty well. The ad hoc line choice on mostly like an unfamiliar course ended up really well, like, cause I had to get around a lot of people, particularly in technical sections. And, it's all the fundamentals. It was like, I thought I can't control what's on the trail, but I can control how I react to it. So I just need to be in the right body position at all times. So I watched a lot of videos of Richie Rude beforehand and reminded myself of what to do, and it helped. And it was awesome. I handled carbs and caffeine well. I took in, if you average it out, I took in 100 grams an hour across the term of the course. However, I took more of it earlier on, no gut upset or anything else. And I took in caffeine through Run Gum. And I took in, I guess what it would be, I did 150 milligrams of caffeine over the course of the race, which is a lot for me. I was pinging throughout that race. So, and the equipment was amazing. I ran 2.4 Recon race tires on my Epic. I was going to go to a shorter stem for it, but I decided to keep it the same because I'd have to refigure out how to balance myself on the bike a bit, and I didn't get enough time testing that. And I really like the climbing position with my 100 millimeter -17. I ran 18 and 19 PSI, which is higher than normal for me, but on this course it was important. And by the end of it, I was up to 22 and 23 PSI. And that was good. I didn't blow up a wheel, and I saw 6 broken wheels going down that course. 6.
Wow.
So
wow.
Yeah, it's pretty gnarly. And then the wax chain worked better than lube. I felt like I had, when Nate, like you're going upstairs and you feel like your legs are exhausted And it's like an indication to you, but it's like when you're training, stairs are like the litmus test. You're like, do I feel really tired going up these stairs or do I feel fine? And for the past 2 weeks, stairs have just been dreadful. I've been like, oh, and they felt really tired.
I feel like when that happens, I'm like glycogen depleted.
Yeah.
And I need to eat like a whole bunch of potatoes.
Yes. Yeah. And I didn't let that get in my head. And instead I just focused on making sure I was carb loaded and did everything I needed. And my legs didn't feel great, but I could still do the work. And that was cool. So, and I had so much fun. This race is really gnarly. It is really technical, and fast and rough, but my gosh, it is like, if you're a mountain biker, this race, it's super cool. And I just had a ton of fun. So
John,
yeah,
you sound pretty disappointed, and you got second in your age group at Downieville. And you know what, Hannah, are you hearing that too? Of kind of focusing on all the things that maybe didn't go as well as he hoped it would have, but he got second overall. And I'm wondering why this disconnect. Sorry, Hannah, I asked you a question. Do you hear the same thing?
I feel like he's just being self-deprecating on the podcast. Like, I feel like we need to give Jonathan a high five and let him brag on himself,
This is awesome.
Sounds like he did great.
Yeah.
I'm really proud of it. And if I guess, I'm probably a bit self-critical on particularly on the podcast. Cause
all your racing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I always fear that like on the podcast, when I talk about my races, that because I see it because I see people's like comments and feedback, and they're like, tell Jonathan to be quiet, like he's like a naturally talented rider. I don't relate to that or something. So I'm really proud of it. I'm proud of the outcome for sure. Did I hope? Yes. And we spent a lot of time talking about how I had hoped for more, sure. But that's just what I need. Those are like the carrots to chase. And it doesn't discourage me come race day. But I was thoroughly, honestly, I know this sounds silly, but the thing I was most happy about is that I had a lot of fun on it. Because after I pre-rode that course, I was like, this does not feel like a lot of fun. It wasn't that it was scary or something. For a lot of people, it might be. For me, it wasn't that it was scary. I was just like, this kind of feels like drudgery. Like a lot of this is just like really rocky fire road or something else. But it was magical. Once you added race pace to it, it was like really fun and it all came alive. So I was just really happy that I had a blast,
And when you say you had fun too, is I hear like you went fast and you found flow. That's what I hear, because fun equals fast, like when you're struggling and you're taking the wrong lines and you're dabbing and all that stuff, that's always when you're like frustrated and you wouldn't necessarily label it fun. So especially I think on a course like this, to say you had fun, that tells me you were probably riding really, really well.
Yeah. And just the right amount of sketchy, right? Like, like pushing, and like there was some sketchy stuff in there to keep you alive or feeling alive, I should say, but not to stop you from being alive. So it was really good.
I imagine, I'm curious to know, especially on the XC race day, how much did you allow yourself to hit your limit on the climb, knowing that you still had to then descend, tired, cross-eyed, whatever it might be, like, not just from a power standpoint, but like, subjectively as well, like 90%, 95%, 80%, how hard did you go?
Yeah, and that was a concern that I had, and I think I actually went a little too conservative there. Like, my body didn't feel completely destroyed at the finish, and I think it probably should have. And going through the descent, like, I didn't have, my back wasn't locked up, my hands weren't destroyed. I did a lot of hand training, by the way, for this. Like, I did not wear gloves when I rode for a really long time. I worked in like the sandbox with my kids and stuff, and like I got my hands dry and tough, and it really helped. So, but I didn't have that. I was kind of holding back on the climb a touch at certain points because I was like, it's a really long descent. And looking back, I think I could have given more. But also like the when you're in a spot like with your fitness and everything else where you feel like, and it's usually because there's other sources of fatigue and everything else coming in, but where you can't really push those limits too hard, like the elastic's kind of stiff rather than stretchy. That's just kind of where I was at. So, but I do think I rode a little bit within myself. That said, most people, I think it's the opposite. I think a lot of people did way too much and then they suffered on the descent. And it really cracks them because it's an hour and 20 minutes of like black diamond like level descending and just relentless, the whole time. And when you have chances to pedal, you have to jump on the pedals as hard as you can. So
both of these things sound horrific to me.
Yeah. I think the most important thing about all this, and let's put the podium picture up right now. And this is for everybody that sent me a message. they gave me more muck off lube for my second place.
Did they really?
Yep. And you can see the bag right now on the screen. You can see the bag sitting in my feet. So that's for everybody that hates me because I use muck off lube. So there we go. It was great. It was an awesome race. I saw so many of you. I counted 12 people on the podium that came up and told me that they were trainer, because we were all hanging out by the podiums for the ceremony, and they're all saying like, I'm a TrainerRoad athlete. I'm a TrainerRoad athlete. 12 people on the podiums across all the different age groups.
Boom.
It's pretty sweet. And honestly, like a subset of the cycling market that isn't really like our specific market, right? There's like, there were a lot of people doing this on more enduro bikes, like fanny packs and stuff, you know, like they were not like, and gnarly DH bros and gals. So it was really cool. And some of those gnarly folks were the ones that came up that said they were trainer athletes. So great job to everybody that raced. It was really cool. It was a blast. Okay, looking at the time that we have, we've already gone pretty long. Let's save the questions for the next time that we would have. Hopefully you've gotten a lot of takeaways from Hannah and her incredible experience at the Kokopelli Trail. Hopefully you've got some insights from my Downieville race too. And if you have any questions, submit them at trainerroad.com/podcast. This is the time of the year to start thinking about your big goals for the next year. So use TrainerRoad to do that. We've got some very exciting things that we've just launched that you can check out. We're taking into account all of your outside activities, or whatever the activities are, inside or outside, that you upload to Strava or Garmin Connect now, and they are affecting your adaptations. It's super cool.
Like swimming, hiking,
yoga, strength training, all that stuff.
You can turn it on in it's on early access on your profile, but by the time you're listening to this, it might be open for everyone.
Very exciting. And we have lots of other new stuff and exciting stuff too that our team's working on, as always, working hard. It's exciting stuff. So go sign up for trainerroad.com, share this with your friends, go watch Hannah's video. We'll talk to you next time. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.